The officers closed the interrogation room door and left two frightened fishermen alone. They expected the men to laugh. A hidden recorder was still running. If Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker had invented their story, this was the moment the performance should collapse. No sheriff was watching. No reporter was waiting. There was no audience to impress. But the tape captured no celebration. It recorded Hickson trying to steady the younger man while Parker struggled with fear. Their voices remained low, strained, and confused. Whatever had happened on the Pascagoula River, they did not sound like two people enjoying a successful prank. That recording is why the case survived. It does not prove that beings from another world carried the men into a craft. It proves something both narrower and harder to dismiss. Inside a room where they believed they were alone, Hickson and Parker still acted like men who had just endured something terrifying. The question is, what created that terror? On the evening of October 11, 1973, Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker went fishing along the west bank of the Pascagoula River in Mississippi. Hickson was a shipyard foreman in his early 40s. Parker, his co-worker, was still a teenager and relatively new to the area. The Gulf Coast around Pascagoula was shaped by industry as much as water. Shipyards, cranes, engines, bridges, and military activity were part of the landscape. Strange lights or mechanical sounds did not automatically mean something unearthly. The men said what approached them was unlike anything they knew. According to their first account, a whirring or zipping sound interrupted the night. Two flashing blue lights appeared near an oval object hovering above the ground. Hickson estimated it was roughly 30 feet long, with a small dome or raised section. Then an opening appeared. Three figures emerged and moved toward them without walking in a normal human way. Hickson described gray, wrinkled beings with unusual projections around the head and claw-like hands. Their legs did not seem to separate normally, and their movement appeared mechanical, almost as if they were floating. The creatures later became some of the strangest entities in American UFO history. They were not the thin, black-eyed figures now associated with alien abductions. They sounded more like biological machines, featureless, rigid, and designed for a task. Hickson said he could not move. Two of the figures seized him while another approached Parker. The older man felt himself lifted from the riverbank and transported toward the object. He did not describe struggling against ordinary physical strength. He described complete helplessness, as if his body no longer belonged to him. Inside, Hickson said he remained suspended while a large eye-like device moved around his body, examining him. He remembered no conversation, star map, warning for humanity, or revelation about the visitor's origin. The experience was clinical and indifferent. Parker's earliest account was more limited. He said he lost consciousness near the beginning and remembered little until the men were returned. Hickson also described the teenager as having fainted. Decades later, Parker said he had remembered more than he originally admitted, but concealed it because he was terrified and wanted the attention to stop. That change matters. Trauma can cause a witness to suppress details. Memory can also expand as a story is revisited, discussed, hypnotically explored, written into books, and repeated over many years. Parker's later account may represent memories he was initially afraid to disclose, or a narrative altered by time. There is no objective test that can separate those possibilities now. The encounter ended as abruptly as it began. Hickson said the beings returned them to the riverbank and the object departed. Parker was in extreme distress. The men were left with a decision almost as frightening as the experience itself. Whom could they tell without destroying their reputations? The original sequence is often retold incorrectly. They did not first drive to a military base and get turned away. Accounts from the time indicate that they approached the local newspaper office, found no reporter available, and then went to the Jackson County Sheriff's Department. Military medical examination came later. At the sheriff's office, Captain Glenn Ryder and other officers listened with suspicion. UFO stories were already circulating across the American South during the wave of reports in 1973. That made Hickson and Parker's claim timely enough to attract attention and easy enough to imitate. The officers considered alcohol and deception. Ryder reported smelling alcohol on Hickson, who said he had consumed whiskey after the encounter to calm himself. The men were not considered drunk, but the detail complicates the polished version in which every conventional factor is absent. Their condition made an impression. Parker appeared overwhelmed. Hickson, though more capable of speaking, was visibly shaken. Their story was extraordinary, but their distress did not look theatrical to the officers interviewing them. So the investigators tried to catch them. They placed the men in a room, left them alone, and kept a recorder operating without their knowledge. The assumption was simple. Liars who had maintained a performance under questioning would relax once the authorities walked away. They might compare details, laugh at the police, or reveal the plan. The tape captured something else. Parker remained frightened about what had happened and what might happen next. Hickson tried to protect and reassure him, but his own voice carried strain. They talked about the creatures and the overwhelming nature of the experience. There was no obvious attempt to rehearse a story. Captain Ryder later said that if the men were lying, they deserved careers in Hollywood. The recording is powerful because it was unguarded. It is also limited. A sincere witness can be wrong. People can experience hallucinations, distorted perception, panic, dissociation, sleep-related states, suggestion, or false memory without consciously lying. Two people can reinforce the same interpretation after a confusing event. The tape tests whether the men were knowingly enjoying a hoax in that moment. It does not identify what stood on the riverbank. Still, deliberate fabrication must explain why they sustained terror when they believed the test was over. The following day, the story escaped the sheriff's office and became national news. Pascagoula filled with reporters, investigators, believers, and spectators. Hickson and Parker were separated and questioned repeatedly. Every inconsistency became evidence of fraud. Every matching detail became evidence of contact. They were also examined at Keesler Air Force Base and cleared for radiation exposure. This is sometimes described as military confirmation that something physical occurred. It was not. A negative radiation test established only that no unusual exposure was detected by that examination. The puncture marks, later reported on their arms, are similarly ambiguous. Small marks can have many causes, and there was no recovered material or laboratory result connecting them to an unknown device. Prominent UFO researchers arrived, including astronomer J. Allen Hynek and James Harder. Hynek had served as a scientific consultant to the U.S. Air Force's UFO study and had become increasingly critical of dismissive explanations. After interviewing the men, he regarded their emotional response as significant and believed they had undergone a real traumatic experience. That conclusion is often shortened to, Hynek proved their story was true. He did not. Evaluating sincerity is not the same as verifying aliens. Hynek could judge whether the witnesses appeared credible and whether their account deserved investigation. He could not reconstruct the event from independent physical evidence. The polygraph story has also grown cleaner with repetition. Modern retellings often say both men volunteered for lie detector tests and passed with flawless results. Contemporary reporting is more complicated. Hickson took a polygraph administered by a local examiner who concluded that he was telling the truth as he believed it. The examiner explicitly did not claim that a spacecraft had landed or that creatures had emerged. Parker did not take that same test at the time. Through an attorney, he declined unless Hickson requested it, and reports noted that he had recently been hospitalized. Claims about later tests do not turn the original examination into scientific proof. Polygraphs themselves do not detect lies directly. They measure physiological changes such as breathing, heart rate, and skin response. Fear, belief, stress, medication, and the examiner's method can affect the result. A frightened person describing a false belief may pass. A truthful person under pressure may fail. The most the test supports is that Hickson appeared committed to his account. claims of later voice stress analysis should be treated with the same caution. There is no universally reliable acoustic signature proving that a recorded speaker is truthful. The emotion on the sheriff's tape is audible. Converting that emotion into a laboratory verdict exceeds what the evidence can carry. For believers, these limitations do not destroy the case. They reveal where its real strength lies. The men made an immediate report. Police observed their distress. Their private conversation remained consistent with fear. They did not begin with a polished mythology or a spiritual message. The creatures were bizarre and mechanical rather than shaped by the familiar alien imagery that would dominate later decades. There were also reports of unusual lights in the broader area. A service station operator reportedly contacted authorities earlier that evening after seeing a strange, illuminated object. Decades later, other witnesses came forward claiming they had seen blue lights or an unidentified craft moving along the river. Their accounts may support the possibility that something aerial was present, but late corroboration is weaker than a statement recorded that night. After 40 years of publicity, documentaries, books, and local legend, witnesses know what kind of details fit the case. That does not make them dishonest. It means memory and cultural influence cannot be removed from the evidence. Skeptics have proposed a deliberate hoax. Hickson was older, more confident, and eventually became the public face of the incident. He appeared on national television, gave lectures, wrote a book, and later claimed additional contacts with the beings. Those developments contradict the simplified claim that he never sought publicity or changed anything around the story. He did not become wealthy, and there is no clear evidence that financial gain motivated the original report. But later celebrity gives critics a reason to ask whether the case evolved because attention rewarded its most extraordinary elements. The hoax theory must also explain Parker. For years, the younger man largely withdrew. He left the area, avoided interviews, and tried to build a life away from Pascagoula. He later said that recognition at jobs made him leave, and that he had concealed parts of his memory because he feared contamination, ridicule, and renewed contact. His long silence can look like trauma. It can also look like a reluctant participant distancing himself from a story led by Hickson. Only Parker knew which interpretation was true. Before his death in 2023, he chose to speak publicly, publish his account, and return to the site where the experience had begun. Another theory is a shared psychological episode. Hickson may have experienced an intense, altered state, perhaps a waking dream, dissociation, or panic, and Parker, already frightened and dependent on his older foreman, may have accepted the same interpretation. Their isolation, darkness, unfamiliar lights, fatigue after work, and the older man's certainty could have shaped the teenager's response. But shared hallucination is not a simple scientific label that explains everything. Two people do not normally experience identical, complex visions by coincidence. The theory requires social transmission. One person interprets an ambiguous event, communicates that interpretation, and the second person adopts or elaborates it. The earliest detail that Parker fainted makes such a mechanism possible. It does not prove it happened. Environmental explanations are weaker when offered alone. Marsh gas can produce small flames under particular conditions. It does not naturally generate three clawed figures and an internal medical examination. Shipyard lights, helicopters, boats, or aircraft might account for the original stimulus, but not the entire narrative unless fear and memory transformed what followed. The most skeptical, credible model is therefore not, they saw swamp gas. It is that they encountered an ordinary but confusing light or machine, panicked, and constructed a shared interpretation under extreme stress, or that one man's experience became the story both carried into the sheriff's office. The extraterrestrial model begins from the opposite direction. It accepts the core testimony. A structured object arrived, non-human entities immobilized the men, Hickson was examined, and both were returned. The hidden tape then becomes evidence that their report was not consciously invented. This model fits their fear. It lacks physical confirmation. No photograph was taken. No trace from the object was preserved. No radar record has been publicly tied to the encounter. No biological material was recovered. The medical examinations did not establish exposure to unknown technology. The case lives almost entirely inside testimony. That would normally make it fragile. The secret recording makes it unusually durable. More than 50 years later, the tape still forces the same distinction. It cannot tell us whether Hickson and Parker met aliens, robots, a military device, an optical illusion, or the darkest corners of human perception. It can tell us that once the investigators left the room, the men did not step out of character. Perhaps there was no character to step out of. Hickson died in 2011. Parker died in 2023. The riverbank now carries a historical marker, and Pascagoula has absorbed the encounter into its identity. The people who could answer the deepest questions are gone, leaving the recording as their most immediate surviving witness. So, listen to the case at its strongest point, not its loudest one. Forget the unreliable polygraph mythology, the claims of scientific proof, and every later embellishment. Two men entered a sheriff's office terrified. Police tried to expose them. In private, their fear continued. Was that the aftermath of contact with something non-human? Or evidence of how completely the human mind can believe an impossible event? Tell us what the hidden tape proves to you, and what it does not. Subscribe to the Shadow Ledger and continue to the next case file. Because stories can change over time, but the ledger remembers what was recorded before the world began listening.